Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to Create a World. I'm Elektra. I am a spiritual mentor that works for, with, and by the side of my clients. I'm also director of the Language of Consciousness Institute, and I'm a collaborator for Create a World. So we collaborators have, some of us have known each other for over 10 years with our work within the field of Tantra. And in that work, we really do practice the states of transparency and intimacy, which means that we share, and we ask each other questions, and we seek to discover the unique and essential aspects of the other person. About a year ago, we really started thinking about, well, let's ask others outside of the community about what they're doing in their work in creating new worlds and new realities, and how they be in the world. So that curiosity led us to create a world. And we began to realize, in asking the questions and being curious and not knowing the answers, was a through line for each of us, a way through all our thoughts and our assumptions and our beliefs about life, ourselves, and others, a way into each of our own kind of innate, natural awareness that for each of us became very real. And that's what's behind Create a World. I and others are here to live out loud with you and with our guests the one medium that is common across all levels of being, and that is conversation. So today, my guest is Russ Merchant. Now, Russ and I are going to talk about conversations with children. So, what does that have to do with how we be with children? Because we certainly know I am talking at you, child, versus a conversation with children. We've been talking about this, and that exploration and discovery and curiosity are really important strengths to encourage our children in, and they're important ones for us as well. So, Russ, I know you're a dad, you're a grandfather, and you're a teacher.
Yes.
So when you and I were talking, you were really talking about there's a way to be in conversation with children, but before that, there's a way of being that you have to be. So
Yeah.
could you start talking about that with the group now?
Yeah. I think for me, it started when my wife and I found out that she was pregnant with our first child. And we actually had a conversation together, and we said, you know, if our children will become who we are more than they'll become who we tell them to be. And we actually made an agreement to become who we wanted our children to become. So we had to look out there and say, who did we want them to be?
Yeah.
And then we had to work on ourselves to be that for them. And then when we found out she was pregnant with my son, I was terrified because I had found out how much work it took to become who I wanted them to become with my daughter. And now I had a son too. And it was like, oh my God, what am I going to do? But it's work that, and the other piece too is my wife and I came from parents, and especially fathers, that were abusive. And it was work we did that allowed us to let go of all that and become who we were as nurturing parents, to allow our children to grow up not knowing what abuse was. And I truly believe we're successful. Looking at my grandson and how my daughter who my daughter is, that my grandson's growing up to be, is just amazing. So for me, that was like the number one thing with children is the who are you? It reminds me of the Cat Stevens song about the father whose son keeps asking him to do things, and he says, "We'll do that when I get some time." And then when he grows up, his son does the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll talk to your
So
dad when I have time.
yeah.
Yeah.
So for me, that's one of the biggest things with raising children. Um, and then in that kind of environment, for me, there are several things that I chose to do. One of them was um, when my daughter or son came to me and said, "Hey, Dad, you got a minute?" And you can tell it's not just, "Hey, will you come play ball with me?" It's like they're thinking about something. And I chose to set everything aside. I don't care what I was doing. I set it aside unless the house was burning down. But, it's like basically they were the most important thing in that moment. And it usually only took 5 minutes, maybe 10. Every once in a while, it would take a half an hour. But they then understood that who I was if they needed my attention, they had it completely. There wasn't anything that was more important than being with them at that moment. And the thing I think, if I track it, the thing I believe happened was we had a lot less um, teen issues, where teens start separating from the parents and then acting out and things like we had a lot less of that. My daughter, when she was a teenager, had 50 friends, and it's like they'd come spend a weekend with us, then they'd spend a weekend with another friend, a weekend with another friend. And it's like when her boyfriend broke up with her, I'm the one she came to. It wasn't her best friends or whatever, and no dad. It's like there's just something going on. She came to me and talked to me about it. But it was, I believe, because I had set aside all that, um, everything else when she came and said, "Hey, Dad, do you have a moment?"
Yeah, that is critical because I remember in raising my kids, particularly my daughter, is that all the way through her teenage years, she would come and talk to me and she would say and ask me questions about life and relationships and stuff. But it was always, I remember her saying, but her friends' parents, her friends can't do that with their parents. And you're
Mhm.
right. If you don't start, it's like, I think when people sometimes look at young children like they're not a regular person, they're young. So
Right.
you don't have conversations. You don't treat them as an equal. But every time that, whether they're 4 or they're 12 or 13, treating them as an equal is they're a person. They just happen to be in a growth state
Yeah.
that we've moved beyond. Um,
That brings up another piece for me
mhm.
is asking questions.
Yeah.
You don't tell them how to live life. You aren't a teacher for them. You are the person they look up to the most. It's like you're their um, you're the source of their food, their clothing, their heat, their bed, their comfortable, all of that. So instead of, and again, it's a way of being, instead of trying to instruct them in what to do, you ask them questions that lead them to what you're trying to get them to understand. So it's
Right.
about, it's like, um, I was in class the other day as a substitute, and there was this young man there that was helping out, and he sat down and he did all the problems for the people in the classroom. And I pulled him aside afterwards and I said, they aren't going to remember almost anything you said because you did it for them. First off, you got to guide them into doing it. And secondly, so even if you tell them what to write and they write it, that'll be better because they'll remember it. But if you can ask them the right question that guide them to the answer you're looking for them to find, that is the critical. It's like for me, that's almost it's a it's a critical piece of learning to deal with children.
It
My
isn't it. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
my my grandson, I take him to school every day and pick him up almost every day. And about a year ago, he came to me and said, "Oh, this guy that does the voiceovers for this character that I really love died." And I said, "What's his name?" He goes, "I don't know." And I said, "If you really respect him and honor him and really like his work, don't you think knowing his name would be important?" And the next day he climbs in the car. "It's Chris Ayres." And I said, "Really? How do you spell Ayres?" The next day he climbs in the car. Ayres. And by the end of the week, he had found out that the guy had done 5,000 voiceovers. He trained 250 other people to do voiceovers. He'd had a career that lasted 20 years or 20 or 30 years. I mean, just by asking him certain questions, not giving him answers, just asking him and guiding him in what might be important. It's like, you really like this guy. You need to know more about him. And it's really amazing what he took away from that.
What would you think he took away from that? Yes, he found out stuff about Chris Ayres.
Right.
But what do you think is the larger lesson that your grandson took away from that interaction?
I think there's two things. One is he can find out that information.
Yeah,
So he discovered whatever he uses, Google or whatever, to find out information about something he's interested in. And the second is that I'm interested enough to listen to him because we take out the garbage. He's as tall as I am now. Okay, he's 14 and he's 6 foot. And we take the garbage out together, and there's 3 trash cans because of all of this stuff they do for recycling. And we usually it's after the dark. So at some point, we'll take the trash out, we'll throw it in the cans, and then he'll stand there and look at me and goes, "Do you ever realize?" And he'll ask me a question, but it's something he's been thinking about. And it's either, what's that star up there? What's that constellation? This is going on at school. I saw this the other day on the news. It's always something, but he's actually very curious about my take on it because I've been curious about his takes on things. And it's very interesting having that two-way conversations. It's not just me dictating to him, take the garbage out. It's like we're doing it together. And it's a time for conversation too.
it sounds too like he's taken away a practice of weaving others' observations into his own observations to come up with something that's a larger understanding, whether it's about a star that appears in the sky or about his favorite voiceover person.
Right.
Isn't it? It's like I always thought that what kids need is a way to gather information and to be open up to more of new ways of looking things. then they need to have be dictated to, whether it's by a teacher in a class or
Yes.
a parent. So what do you think about that?
The I think the first off, I think there's two ways of teaching. One is to dictate. The other is teaching them to ask the right questions. I read a series of books when I was young. The gentleman's name was Robert Heinlein, and they were brilliant because one of the things he wrote later in his life was, I didn't write those books to answer questions. I wrote those books so that people could start thinking for themselves and asking the right questions.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm pointing to, is him learning the right questions to ask to get to what he's interested in. He's
Yeah.
he's doing music, and he started with a guitar about 2 years ago. He's already got a regular guitar, a bass guitar, a piano. He's tried playing the the saxophone, the tenor sax, the bass clarinet, and he's now on a euphonium.
My gosh.
Okay.
Oh.
And he's really good at it too. And he's able to read the different, I mean, each of those have, you got treble clef and bass clef, and you've got the way guitars are done. And he's learned to read all that. And it's, he brings to me, say, have I shown you this piece of music? And he'll play it on his phone, and then he'll actually play it where you can watch the notes on the screen, and he'll talk about how hard it is or easy it is, or how bored he he gave up the bass clarinet because it was so boring. And most of the things, he had 3 to 4 notes that he played over and over, and he just didn't like that. It's like he's now on a euphonium that has, sections are boring, but other sections are quite lively. And it's like, but he's discovering that. And he's actually bringing that back to me and teaching me what he finds interesting, which is, I think, a real joy. Having your kids bring back to you the things they think are interesting and talk to you about them is really, and for me, it's a happy time.
Yeah, it's that joy of watching them start to be in the world, their own being, their own perspective, their own way. Because neither you nor your wife play instruments, right? Or
Well,
did you
I
at some
played the
point in your
piano,
life?
and I used to play the French horn when I was in school. But no, I don't usually play them around him. But my daughter sang, and she loves to sing. So she had the musical intent through voice, and now he's finding that musical through the things that he's doing, the guitar and the things that he's doing.
Well, one of the things that used to be a complaint, and I don't really know if people do it now, is that people felt that they had to do what the work in the field that their parents did, whether or not that was something they wanted to do. And I would assume that was conveyed directly by the parents. No, you're going to be in the family grocery store business. No, you're going to be,
Or
a lawyer.
go be a doctor because you can make a lot of money.
Right.
Or go be a lawyer because you can make a lot of money.
Right.
Yeah.
And that doesn't, so what they learn is, I'm not supposed to pay attention to what feeds me or makes me feel myself in the world. I have to kind of squeeze myself in order to either please mom and dad or to make money, that they have to squeeze themselves into another role, which means by the time they get to middle age, they're just really unhappy because they've spent education time, professional development in a field that really doesn't give them joy and really help them expand. And I think it is one of the juxtapositions that parents, sometimes you say, like your grandson, well, don't spend time on music. You're not going to make any money that way. You have to, study physics or whatever. But and that decision, he's only what, 14 now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, but you could have already been implanting that in him. Instead, you're really enjoying expanding his own capacities and capabilities with music. And that's a very different way of holding the space for your grandson to grow into who he wants to be.
Yes. Now, there is a piece in there for me that I've got in the background that I have taught him financial literacy by playing a game. There's a game called the Cash Flow Game by Robert Kiyosaki, and it teaches you to read a financial statement over time. And for me, being able to read a financial statement and know how money actually works will handle the income. So he can do that part-time. It's like he can create enough money for him to live on part-time. Then he can do what he loves, music, if it doesn't ever cost him, if it doesn't bring him any money. And maybe it will. Maybe he'll become a success in music, but then he'll know what to do with that money. So, and again, it's by sitting down and regularly, I mean, we played, I think it was at least once a month. It might have been 2 or 3 times a month for about 4 years. So again, it's about, part of that is the longevity with which you do something. It wasn't just a 1 time or 3 time, or, for a month we played this game every day and then he forgot about it.
It's about over time.
Yeah. And then part of the reason he's doing it is because we did it with our kids. And they came back to me. We moved to California and they came in and they said, we want to play that game again. That game being the cash flow game.
Yes.
And so we started sitting down playing it, and you roll dice and you move around the board and you fill out a cash flow. Well, we didn't have him. He was 6 at the time, or 7, something like that, 8. We didn't have him fill out the form. Okay. All he did was sit there. He'd roll the dice, pull a card, read it, or turn it over to somebody, but he'd listen to everything going on in the game. So then when he was, I think, about 10, I started playing with him where he was running one of the financial statements. And again, this is over a long period. If you take on, I hear it called the compound effect. It's taking on small things over long periods of time without giving up anything. So we play maybe once a month. And then by the time he was 12, he started, I think it was 10. By the time he was 12, he could run my QuickBooks, which is an accounting software.
Yeah, yeah.
And that was just from playing a game. Again, it wasn't trying to teach him anything. It was playing a game that he enjoyed playing because he got to play with the biggest kids in the house. Right? His mom, his dad, his uncle, his grandma. Not his dad, his granddad, sorry. But it's like, it's finding things that will encourage them. But that frees him up to not have to become a lawyer to make money. He can figure out how to invest his money so that he can then become whatever he wants and just spend a little bit of time doing that on the side whenever he needs to. So for me, that was a huge piece of the way we've been raising our children.
Well, it sounds like what you're really stressing is that when we even engage, let's say we engage in an activity with the kids, that we're hoping that they take away something, that it's an overtime activity. It's
Yes.
not like my dad used to drive my brothers to school downtown as when he went to work.
Yeah.
And that gave them tremendous amount of time to just discuss different stuff that was
Yeah.
coming up for them. And what I noticed was the relationship between my brothers and my dad was much closer than those of us who didn't have that opportunity.
Mhm.
You know, if we, one of the dangers I think that's going on right now is that people look at their phones a lot
Yeah.
when they're with the kids. And instead of being with the kids, they're looking at their phone. And
Which is an interesting piece about the driving,
yeah,
because while
yeah,
you're driving, you can't be looking at your phone.
yeah. So you can be in conversation.
Right.
Yeah. Now you do that with your grandson, though, right?
I intentionally walked him to school when he was in elementary school, and then took on driving him to school to middle school, which has now been 3 years. He's, like 2.5 years. He's halfway through his last year in middle school. But that's 15 minutes in the car every morning. And sometimes I bring up the questions and sometimes he does. Actually, nowadays, he brings it up more than I do. So, but he's actually curious as to what I think. And he listens to me questioning him about what he's saying. So that I'm teaching him to learn the questions, not the answers.
Which, yeah, which is the key skill. And that last year I got to pick up two of my grandkids from school. And so I had that time with them every day to just ask them questions. Or, like my grandson is one of these guys, he really likes to go deep into any subject that he's looking at, and he's going into a school that allows him to do that. So he would extrapolate information and weave it in.
Mhm.
Through that practice of, I think, the school allowing him to go deep, if that was where his interest was. And then he was really interested in, like, what do you know about this? Or do you know this new fact I have? And we would talk about what that meant for whatever, whether it was what it meant for the culture, what it means for him. Um, but it's in the engaging in the conversation
Yeah.
that is the most critical piece. Because if we don't, I think we send another message.
Yeah. And something you said right there, most schools, now you may have a
He's,
school that's unique.
yes.
Most schools are still 20th century schools for that, putting out people that can work in the factories and pull that lever for 8 hours, doing the same job over and over again, and not having to know just enough to do that. And then, so it's the new school, they don't teach collaboration yet very much. And
Mhm.
that's what makes world work today, is collaboration. Most of the high-tech companies are because several people got together, collaborated, and created this company, not because they created a factory and hired a bunch of people to run the machines. That's not what's going on anymore. And what you're talking about is, if you can teach them, and if you can get them to start thinking about how they're going to collaborate with others, by how are they collaborating with you, because you're asking them questions and they're learning questions to ask of themselves and others, so that it generates um, working together to create something, as opposed to I'm doing this and you're doing this, and you've got this triangle tree that, top-down leadership. That's no longer effective.
No, and it hasn't been effective for a while. And I think that's one of the big problems that we've got going on right now, is that the world is changing so quickly these kids kind of have to almost be able to twirl on a dime to be able to look in new directions. And if people aren't trained to investigate from different perspectives, one of the example I always like to give is, the five blind men around the elephant,
Oh
and they
yeah.
each have their own version of what the elephant is. It's a
Yeah,
big
he looks
trunk,
like a
it's a
tree trunk.
hose.
Hmm.
But if each of those blind men moved their position around the elephant, they would eventually know what an elephant was,
Yeah,
because they would. And that's the skill that the kids have got to have.
yeah. Or they need to be able, not them moving around, but be able to not take what the other person's seeing as false because what I think see is this,
Yeah,
okay? But be able to then combine it together and see together the elephant. Because they don't necessarily need to each go around the elephant. They just need to
they just
trust the
have to.
other person is
Yeah,
saying something accurate. It's not
that's
what they're
huge.
seeing, but it's an accurate seeing.
That's absolutely the best way. Yeah. If they start to know that it's just a different perspective and add that to the view, then suddenly they have the diamond in front of them
Right.
instead of just one facet as the only truth. And isn't that kind of the problem that we have now in most of society, is that people say, well, this is my perspective, so that's it, and you're wrong,
Right.
right? Not only are you wrong, you're bad.
Yeah.
So there's no extrapolation. Um, if you were to advise people about how to start this, and I know you started it with you and Deb started it when you we're going to have a child, and said, look, we got to change who we are if we want them to be different, if we
Yeah.
want them to have a
Yeah.
better opportunity. So what would you start, and here we're talking to parents out here who probably have grade school kids,
Right.
maybe older.
As
However.
soon as you can. I mean, if you can actually get that you can't dictate to your children how to become the adults you want them to become, but that and they're going to be who you are, and then find a way to become that. I mean, for me and my wife, we took what was then the S training. Now it's the forum. I've been in conversations with Tantra, if anybody knows her, for 30 years or more. Um, we've created community where we find other like-minded people like you and I. I mean, we're sitting here talking and we're saying the same thing. Okay. Um, if you can find someone like that, and again, mentors, if you can find somebody that could support you in paying the right attention, because hearing it once isn't enough. Again, as an adult, you've got the same issue. You're going to become who you have around you. I think the thing is, you'll become the like the six most influential people in your life. So the people you spend the most time with, you're going to become them. You'll be the seventh. And so start looking for other parents that have this capability. You and I haven't talked this out and decided, 20 years ago to do this and
Right.
trained each other, right? We just came across each other. They'll come across people like us.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Um, and it's like just engage, become friends with them, ask them to be their mentors, ask them to, you know, even have the kids play together. And maybe that won't work, but even trying will alter who you are. So that's another piece too.
Yeah. And it's I'm actually, as you were talking, I had to laugh because what came to mind was I have um a daughter-in-law who realizes the kid's fascination with technology, but she doesn't want to support it as much. She really wants them reading and getting involved in board games or something. So it turns out that the internet isn't very reliable in her house. So she goes and unplugs the internet, and the kids go, "Oh, it's off again." And then they start reading, or they play board games together, or they go out and play with their friends. So she's used she's used that as an excuse.
Awesome.
But because what she wants is she wants them physically active, she wants them playing together, she wants them reading, that kind of thing, instead of being stuck in front of their Kindle or an iPad. So there's always little things that you can do that really make, that to set it up. Like you said, the initial question you said was, what kind of people do we hope they become?
Yeah.
And you have to shift how you behave, the parent behaves. We have to shift how we behave in order to be the parent will help them be the best they can be.
Yeah, one of the things I did for a while was to read to Caleb, my grandson. And it was that being repetitive and consistent, you know. And it's like my daughter, Caleb, will go up when she goes to bed, and he'll sit there and talk her ear off for about a half hour. So she knows she has to go to bed a half hour early, which is, it's not always the thing you'd want to do. But if she does that, he comes up and he sits there and talks to her for a half hour.
Yeah.
So you make those concessions.
You make the concessions, and to realize it, like my son used to do that. He'd wait until his sister was asleep, and then he would come in my bedroom and he'd want to talk about stuff. Well, I'm sitting there with toothpicks holding my eyes open, But I realized
right?
that I just, what?
You did it.
Yeah, I did it. And what that allowed was for him to be able to share. He had a little sister who was little big ears, right? And she wanted to know, oh, what are they talking about? But if she's sound asleep, he had the freedom to come in and talk to me about what was going on in his life. And it was that, just like your daughter, the acknowledgement, like, okay, I either change my bedtime or I stay up later and I engage with my child, because otherwise, how will I be able to help him make the decisions that he needs to make or she needs to make in the world?
And if you do that in the right way, they end up trusting you.
Yes.
Because if you don't try to dictate to them, but you engage in real conversation, like they're an adult, like what they're talking about is meaningful. That you hold it just as meaningful for you as it is for them. And they understand that.
Yeah. And they get it. And I think it's quite an honor for them as they perceive it to be treated as an adult. One time I asked my granddaughter a question while we were just waiting for her brother to come out from school. And she really had to think about it. And it was an adult question, like something like, do you want kids? That kind of deeper question. And the next day I said to her, I'm really sorry that may not have been appropriate to ask you right then. It was kind of deep. And you could see her, like, she was taken back by the apology. Not, and she said, no, the question was okay. But I could tell that it meant something to her that I, as the grandmother, would apologize to her for possibly asking too deep a question. And that was more important, I think, in our relationship than me asking the original question. So a lot of times, if we say, this is an individual that we get present to be with them through all their growing up to be an adult. But we mostly want to be, well, it's a two-pronged thing, be that they know us as friend.
Yeah.
Not as dictator, not as somebody that they have to fear not fulfilling our expectations.
Yeah.
Even though we do have expectations, because the questions themselves become right. How I expect you to interact with me in the world. Right?
Yeah. And it's really beautiful because in the conversation, like one of the things I do, Caleb's really into music, I've said. And my grandson, he, you know, I find things on the internet while I'm, scanning different things. And like there'll be this piece of music that I remember from my childhood. So I'll call him in and play it for him just to show him that his life matters to me. I haven't heard that song in 20 years, but it meant something to me when I was his age, or old, a little bit older, a little bit younger. But, it's like, and he'll sit there and listen to it. Now we'll talk about it. It's like, oh, yeah, that song actually has a story behind it. Can you hear the story behind it? Can you hear where that would have meant something to me when I was young? It's like, the one about Cats in the Cradle. It's like, I didn't want, I actually used that song to guide me in this conversation because I didn't want to get to the point where my children didn't talk to me because I had been so busy in my lifetime while they were growing up that, and that they become that way. Well, my daughter is the way she is with her son at night because I was that, my wife and I were that way with her when she was young. And I apologize. I've been talking about me so much, but it's both me and my wife. We agreed on these kind of things. This isn't just me as a parent dictate. We agreed to this, and we both acted on it.
That's a critical piece.
Yeah.
Because if one parent asks the questions and the other says, just do what I say, yeah. They pretty much learn that, okay, there's two ways to be in the world. And with this parent, I ask questions, but I make sure that I don't ask the questions when I'm with the other, if the other person is present. So it's a matter of, we do teach them how to be in the world.
Yeah. And they will learn it.
Yeah. And one of the things I always thought that one of the saddest things for me would have been if my kids grew up to be schnooks. Mm-hmm. If they weren't nice, if they weren't part of the being involved with the community and had friends and just were good people, that would be hard. That would be devastating to me, that I raised a child that wasn't all those things.
And you are capable of altering, because both my wife and I grew up. I had like three friends, and one of which was my best friend. She grew up, I think, with no friends outside the family because of our dads. And my daughter had a group of 30 friends. My son had a group of about 5 or 6 friends that were really tight. They're still in conversations. Mm-hmm. And my grandson, he went out trick-or-treating. Now, this is a 14-year-old. They didn't do more than about 4 or 5 houses, but there were 18 of them.
Oh my God.
And it's like, and they almost look like adults, it's like, but
they're 6 foot tall. Yeah.
Right. But they walked together for, I think he said, 5 miles.
Wow.
Only trick-or-treating once in a while. But, I don't know how to have that many friends. It just, I didn't grow up that way. But he's My daughter did it. My son has not as many, but has a select few really close friends. And now my grandson's mirroring my daughter. So it's just interesting how, and you can alter reality, because, what Deb and I did changed the lives of 3 people.
And not just 3 people.
Yeah,
The 18 kids your grandkid
right.
hangs with are
Mhm.
impacted by the kind of guy that he is,
Yes,
just impacted by that original decision that you and Deb made to
yeah,
say, we will change so that they become more
yeah,
of who they came here to be.
yeah,
It, that's amazing when you think about it. It gives me chills actually to say, the one decision that you two made, and then the persistent, we will do things deliberately differently so these kids have the opportunity.
yeah,
And I'm getting chills because it is in that daily, regular application. That sounds kind of formal, but living it, like the waiting up in bed at night,
yeah.
like going out to the garbage can together to have a conversation, not a go out there and get it and put the garbage away, for God's sakes, it's your job. You could do that, but it's in that work. So when we get pregnant with our children, we don't realize the journey that we have just
Yeah,
launched ourselves on. And it's a journey for us as much as it's a journey for raising this little person
yeah. Now,
into the best that they could be.
yeah, if people are pregnant or going to have more children, one thing I recommend, and I think it made a huge difference, is we taught our children sign language.
Yeah, my
Okay,
kids did
because
that
they
too.
can learn sign language 6 months before they can talk,
Yep.
which if you give them that, then I mean, it's too late if they're already older than that, but if that's what's going on, the power it gives them over the ability to affect their environment. They can tell you if they have a diaper that needs to be changed. They can tell you if they're hungry. They can tell you if they want more. They want a strawberry or a banana. Okay. And if they can do that 6 months ahead of time, I just saw something saying that kids create like 30,000 new neurons a minute.
Wow.
Now, that to me sounded astronomical, but it's like if they're doing that at that age, now as you grow older, it decreases, but if they're doing that at that age, just think of how much time it feels like for them between age 6 months and a year or a year and a half. And you're giving them that power that much more early. And I think that raises them to be, again, they're interacting with a parent that can interact with them. So this whole thing we've been saying all along, you're doing that 6 months earlier.
Yeah. And that's much more common. My daughter certainly did that with her kids. One
Mhm.
of the things I noticed, even with the little ones, if they're really bright, they get very frustrated by that stage,
Yeah.
that when they can't talk, because they're trying to convey to the world what they need, but they don't. Without sign language, they have a very limited repertoire, which I
And you
see a
don't
lot of
need
them
that
then
many
get upset.
signs.
What?
They don't need that many signs.
No, they don't. Eat more,
Yeah,
all of those are, and you can ask them, do you want strawberries or do you want bananas?
right.
And the kid can give you the answer back. Yeah. And, you know, that is, that's a really good start way to say to them, By doing this, I am giving them more control over their environment, more options to be in interaction. So even at that young age, you know, when my parents were having children, they were still in that they only can be at every 4 hours, and you have to let them cry. And
Oh, yeah.
and when they did that, they told them what you got imprinted. Then the child's mind was, what, my needs will not be met.
Yeah.
I have to wait for
And
others to give to me when they want to do it, not when I need it.
the
So
most important person in their lives, their parents.
yeah,
It's not being met by my parents.
right. And I have to comply with them. So if you're
Yeah.
talking about creating a compliant workforce, it probably starts with Spock.
Yeah.
His feed them every 4 hours. That's all they, that's when they have to do it. So there's so many things in our society that have to change to create these flexible adults who are into collaboration and discovery and curiosity.
Yeah.
And the one that we can, you and I, and every parent out there, is how we parent our children,
Yeah.
how we relate to them. Yes, my grandson and my granddaughter, the two of them, go to a different kind of school. It's called World Mind Immersion Nature School. And it's a movement across the United States, but it has the
Cool.
kids outside learning half the day, and they have them inside. When they're inside, they have them do projects. They learn through projects. So it's a different approach to allowing the child to explore and discover,
Mm-hmm.
instead of, as my granddaughters used to say, she said, why do I have to sit 7 hours a day at a desk to learn something that I'm
Yep.
not really interested in?
Yep.
And she was astute. This was a kid was telling me this when she was 9 years old. And she'd already thought it through. And she knew why, like she said, shaming somebody in front of a class of people just to get them to do what you want is not right.
Right.
And I'm going like, okay, bright. And she's moved, she managed to get herself into the school because
That's
that's what she
awesome.
wanted.
There's also the piece of, if you're a teacher and you're having to control a classroom, like the last set of subbing I did, I had the kids sit in their normal seats. I took the roll and I said, look, I'm not one for making you sit in a particular seat. I'm not one for saying you can't listen to music. I'm not one, but if you're a disturbance to the classroom, I can't let you disturb the other children that are trying to learn. So if you'll talk in normal tones, and you can change to any seat you want. And by the time they were done, they were, groups of about 2 to 6 sitting together doing their work, the sheet that it was supposed to be filled out. And they were teaching each other, which is one of the best forms of learning. So the ones that knew it would teach the ones that didn't, so they learned better. Because I think the medical profession says, see one, do one, teach one. Okay. So it's like they had that opportunity in that classroom with me while we were there.
And what a wonderful opportunity for
Yeah.
them. And I think that's it. And so you're right. It doesn't matter how old your kid is now. You can shift, and the teachers can shift. It's a new model of what do I need the larger skill for them to get from this? Isn't the larger skill helping how to both learn and
And it's collaboration.
yeah, that's it, that they
They
have to learn that
collaborated that
because that's a
during those
skill that they
periods.
have to have for the future.
Yes. Yep. It was awesome. And then I've had a couple people, because I've taken time out and I've talked to kids in the classrooms about financial literacy and how to use a financial statement and why they need to. And, if you can't track it, you can't control it. And I had two people stop me in the halls and said, Mr. Merchant, you made me buy that book.
You made
So,
me.
right. It's like, but they said, basically, you got me so engaged in this that I couldn't not go out and buy that book and keep working with what you said in class.
Isn't that wonderful? You
Right.
go like, thanks. I'm glad I made. I'm glad it had
Yep.
that effect. But but the fact that they could come up to you and say that thank you
Yeah.
meant that they understood you as someone who cared about their own openness to learning.
Right.
It wasn't a complaint at you, it was almost a joke with you.
Yes.
Mhm.
I've had several of them come up after I did that talk. I'd take 20 minutes of an hour class and do that. And they'd come up to me afterwards and go, that was the most productive math class I've had since I started doing math.
Wait,
Just
yeah,
it's just fun. It's fun to get that feedback.
it is because you go, wow, I'm glad they enjoyed it as much as I do.
Yeah,
And, you know, and they told you that because they knew you would enjoy hearing it.
yeah. Because the
So
way I taught it is I don't just lecture.
yeah.
I ask questions.
So
I
it's
ask
the
them,
model.
it's like, if we're talking about liabilities, I say, what's a liability? If it's the definition is it takes money out of your pocket whether you're working or not. And
Mhm.
somebody will come up with your house and they'll say, well, how'd you get here this morning? And they'll say a bus. And I say, well, if you don't ride a bus, how would you get here? And they say a car. And I say, yeah, a car. It's a liability. It takes money out of your pocket whether you're working or not. You got to pay insurance. You got to pay gas. And just those small things, but it's like getting them to think through what I'm asking and more asking questions than lecturing to them.
Because once you start lecturing, the mind turns off.
Yes,
It's not open. By asking questions, you're actually making them think about something and listen more to what you have to say in response.
right.
You could give them the lecture and mm,
Yes.
he's not talking about anything I'm connected with. I'm bored.
And then give them the opportunity. I gave them the resources. I say, look, I'm only here an hour. You only get me for this hour this day. You may never see me again. But here are the things that you can do, and which I gave him the names of the book, and he said he went out and bought them. Because I gave him the names of the books and I gave him the name of the game and whatnot.
So we're down to just a little over 2 minutes.
Okay.
Russ, this has been a fantastic conversation. Is there any last thing that you would like to say to our audience, those who are listening?
I think we've been saying it all along, and it's just the look to yourself and who you are if you want to change who you think you want your children to be. And that is a lifetime's work. At any moment, you have the opportunity to change who you are so that your children can see who they might become.
That's a pearl.
Yeah.
A pearl of wisdom. And I absolutely agree. I think it's we want to be able to ourselves take time to choose our response instead of being reaction. And if we work on being the kind of person that we really want to be in the world, the children will see that and they'll copy it. And then, but the questions, your whole idea about questions is like critical. So I invite everybody out there to be curious and discover something about somebody else that they didn't know before. Next week, you are going to get to listen to Deb Merchant and Tantra Mott, and they're going to talk about how the body is responding to these times that we're in, where a lot of different stuff is going on. So I look forward to listening with you next week to Deb and Tantra, and I hope you all have a wonderful week. See you next week.
Thanks.